Abandoned psychiatric hospital in Pennsylvania. After leaving behind the haunted school in Alabama, Kate and I needed some time to collect ourselves and forget the terrifying experience we had just endured. The sound of invisible footsteps and the slamming doors still echoed in our minds. To calm down, we decided to head north toward Pennsylvania, hoping to find some peace. One chilly evening in a small roadside town, we unexpectedly ran into an old friend of mine, Matt, sitting in a cozy little cafe, surrounded by the warm glow of yellow lights. It almost felt like the horrors of Alabama were just a distant memory. Matt told us about an infamous abandoned psychiatric hospital deep in the woods of Pennsylvania. According to him, it had been a facility for treating severely ill mental patients, but it was closed decades ago after a series of mysterious incidents. They say that if you stand near the hospital at night, you can hear the screams of patients still echoing from inside, Matt whispered, his eyes filled with apprehension. And sometimes, lights turn on in rooms that have long been sealed shut, as if someone is still living there. Kate and I probably should have ignored the story, but you know how it goes. Curiosity is always the guide that leads us into the most unpredictable situations. The next morning, we packed our things and set out for the hospital. The road to the psychiatric hospital was covered in thick mist, winding through dense trees that left only faint traces of sunlight on the ground. Our Harley roared through the eerie silence, cutting through the still air. As we got closer, the silhouette of the hospital emerged from the fog like a giant, slumbering beast. Its crumbling red brick walls and shattered windows looked like soulless eyes staring right back at us. "This must be the place Matt was talking about," I muttered, gazing up at the imposing building. Kate stood beside me, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the dark entrance. "This place feels wrong. But since we're here, let's see what we can find." We entered through the half-broken front door. The smell of mold and dust made me cover my mouth. The cracked tiles beneath our feet creaked with every step as we walked down the long, dark hallway. On both sides were hospital room doors, each one seemingly holding the secrets of a bygone era. "Watch your step," I said, pointing at a section of the floor that had caved in. "This place doesn't look very stable." Kate carefully stepped over the gap, her eyes scanning the surroundings like she was searching for something. "These marks," she said, pointing at the wall. There were crude charcoal drawings scrawled across the peeling plaster. Some of the symbols were unrecognizable, but they sent a chill down my spine. We continued deeper into the hospital, our footsteps growing heavier with each step. The ceiling above us groaned, accompanied by the sound of wind whistling through the broken windows. It felt like the entire place was breathing, watching us. We stepped into a large room that seemed to have once been a main treatment area. Rusted hospital beds lay scattered across the floor, and tattered pieces of fabric hung limply from them. On a nearby table, I noticed an old, weathered notebook with its cover barely holding together. "Take a look at this." I called to Kate and opened the notebook. It was a journal belonging to a former patient. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls and faded black ink. October 15th, 1956. "He came again last night. The doctor says it's just a hallucination. But I know he's real. He always stands in the corner, his red eyes staring at me. I try not to sleep, but he's always waiting for me to close my eyes." A shiver ran down my spine. "Kate, I think we've just stumbled onto a story we weren't meant to uncover." Kate looked up, her eyes sharp. "This is just the beginning. Tom, are you ready for what's next?" "Not really, but we can't turn back now." And with that, we pressed on, completely unaware that what lay ahead would be far more terrifying than anything we had faced before. We ventured deeper into the hospital, each step sinking into the thick darkness and frigid air. The hallways seemed endless, and every hospital room door was tightly locked, except for a few, left slightly ajar, as if inviting us inside. "Did you hear that, Tom?" Kate paused, her eyes tense as she scanned the area. I tilted my head to listen. At first, there was only dead silence. But then, I heard it. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Slow and deliberate, as though someone was strolling through the hospital. "Who's there?" I called out, but only my own voice echoed back from the walls. A chill ran up my spine when the footsteps stopped abruptly. "Tom, this isn't a joke," Kate whispered, her voice low and cautious. "We should leave." Before I could respond, the door behind us slammed shut with a deafening bang. There was no wind. No one in sight, yet the door had been forcefully pushed close. Kate screamed and jumped back, her eyes wide with terror. "What the hell is going on?" I grabbed Kate, trying to stay calm. "We have to keep moving. If we turn back now, we might never get out." We entered another large room that appeared to be a communal treatment area. Rows of rusted hospital beds lined the space, their restraining straps still intact. A foul stench emanated from the dark corners, where the shadows seemed to swallow everything. Suddenly, the old fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered to life, casting a dim, ghostly glow. It was just enough light for me to see a faint silhouette of someone standing in the far corner of the room. "Kate, someone's over there," I whispered, pointing toward the figure, but when I turned back, it was gone. Kate clutched my hand tightly. "We have no choice but to keep moving. We need to find a way out, fast." We quickened our pace, every nerve on edge as we listened intently to our surroundings. Just as we passed a hallway leading to the basement, an eerie sound echoed through the air. It was laughter, low, raspy, and drawn out, as if coming from deep underground. The basement, it's always the most dangerous place, Kate warned, yet something compelled me to go down there. We descended the stairs slowly, each step taking us further into the suffocating darkness. At the bottom, the air felt heavy and damp. A large iron door stood before us, covered in strange symbols, exactly like the ones we had seen on the walls earlier. "Maybe this is where it all began," Kate said, her voice trembling slightly. I pushed the door open, and it groaned loudly before revealing a dark chamber. Extinguished candles lay scattered across the floor, and in the center of the room was a large circle drawn with what looked like dried blood. The iron door slammed shut behind us with a loud clang. The temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath in the air. "Tom, I think something's coming," Kate said, her eyes locked on the darkness ahead. A frigid wind swept through the room, rustling the pages of old documents scattered on the table. Footsteps returned, this time from all directions, as if multiple people were walking toward us. "Who's there? Show yourself," I shouted, trying to sound confident, but my heart pounded violently in my chest. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a man in a long white coat, his face pale and sunken, with a twisted smile. "Welcome back," he rasped, his voice like a cold wind. Kate took a step back, her grip on my hand tightening. "Tom, we need to get out of here." The man advanced toward us, his footsteps slow and deliberate, as if savoring our fear. I pulled Kate toward the iron door, but it wouldn't budge. "No one leaves," the voice echoed again, this time from every corner of the room. We were surrounded by ghostly figures, patients with vacant eyes and bleeding wounds. One of them reached out and touched my arm, sending an icy chill through my body. "Kate, break the circle," I shouted. Kate ran to the circle on the floor and kicked at the dried blood until it broke. The moment the circle was disrupted, chaos erupted. The ghostly figures screamed and began to dissolve into the air. The iron door swung open, and we didn't hesitate for a second. We sprinted back up the stairs, our breaths ragged and hearts racing. When we burst out of the hospital into the daylight, the warmth of the sun felt almost surreal. I glanced back at the hospital's entrance. The door was once again closed, and I could feel the invisible eyes still watching us from within. "Tom, do you feel like we brought something back with us?" Kate asked, her voice filled with worry. I looked down at my wrist and froze. A faint red mark, resembling the symbols on the basement door, was slowly forming on my skin. The haunted village in the Appalachian Mountains. After leaving the abandoned psychiatric hospital in Pennsylvania, Kate and I couldn't shake off the lingering unease. The memories of the ghostly presence in the basement and the strange mark on my wrist haunted us both. We decided to take a break and stopped by a small museum at the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, hoping to relax and regain our balance. The museum displayed the history and culture of the local mining communities. The curator, Mr. Henry, was an elderly man with sharp eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. He told us about the rich history of the area, and then, as if recalling a distant memory, he spoke of a mysterious village hidden deep in the mountains that vanished without a trace in 1907. No one truly knows what happened to that village, Mr. Henry said, his eyes darkening. They say the people who lived there faced a terrible disaster, and since then, the village has been lost in darkness. A few have tried to find it, but none ever returned. Kate and I exchanged a glance, curiosity sparking in both of us. It seemed we both knew we couldn't ignore the story. Can you show us how to get there? I asked, trying to sound calm. Mr. Henry shook his head. You shouldn't go there. There are things in the forest that shouldn't be disturbed. But if you've already decided, be very careful. With a hastily sketched map from Mr. Henry in hand, we began our new journey, venturing deep into the Appalachian forest in search of the haunted village. The path into the forest grew increasingly faint, almost swallowed by thick trees and dense fog. We drove along rugged dirt roads until they became too narrow to continue by car, forcing us to proceed on foot. Are you sure we're on the right track? Kate asked, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of a trail. According to the map, we are, I replied, though doubt was creeping in. The towering trees blocked out most of the light, leaving only thin beams filtering through the thick canopy. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of walking, we saw the first signs of the village. Old wooden houses, covered in moss and vines, emerged from the mist. The entire village lay in eerie silence, as though time had stopped long ago. This must be the place Matt told us about, I muttered, stepping toward the nearest house. The wooden door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, everything seemed untouched. A rustic dining table with neatly arranged dishes. A bed in the corner still covered with a blanket, as if someone had just left. It looks like they left in a hurry, Kate observed, carefully stepping into the room. But why? We continued exploring house after house, and the question grew more insistent in my mind. Every home told the same story. Everything was abandoned suddenly, as if some catastrophe had struck without warning. In a large house at the center of the village, we found a handwritten letter on the table. The ink had faded, but it was still legible. October 15th, 1907. Last night, we heard strange noises coming from the mine. Blue lights flashed in the darkness, and no one dared step outside. I fear that what we've always dreaded has finally happened. We must leave immediately. Tom, this isn't right, Kate said, handing me the letter. What do you think happened? I don't know, I replied, the sense of unease growing stronger. But maybe we need to find the mine. The answer might be there. As night began to fall, the atmosphere in the village grew heavier. The wind howled through the empty houses, creating sounds like whispers. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer alone. We decided to stay in the village overnight, as the darkness had already enveloped the entire forest, making it too dangerous to return. Kate and I found a house that seemed sturdy enough to shelter us for the night. The light from our flashlights cast shadows on the old walls, creating eerie shapes that seemed to move. "Tom, I have a bad feeling about this," Kate said, her eyes glued to the window. "Do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. At first, there was only silence, but then a faint sound, like footsteps, echoed from outside. The steps were slow and deliberate, as if someone were strolling around the village. There was no light, no sign of life. It might be an animal. I tried to reassure her, though my own nerves were starting to fray. As the night deepened, the sounds became clearer and closer. Shadows passed by the window, but whenever we turned the flashlight toward them, there was nothing but darkness. Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to investigate. "Stay here, I'll check outside," I said, gripping the flashlight tightly as I stepped out. The wind howled through the abandoned houses, creating a haunting symphony of whispers. I walked along the village path, sweeping my flashlight across the dark corners. Then, I heard it, a voice calling softly from the woods. "Tom." The voice was faint, almost a whisper, as if it were carried on the wind. I turned around, but no one was there. My instincts screamed that something was watching me. I hurried back to the house, but when I entered, Kate was gone. "Kate, where are you?" I called out, but only the wind answered. Panic surged through me. I ran through the village, searching frantically. I strained to hear any sign of her, and finally, I caught her voice coming from the large house at the center of the village. I rushed inside and found Kate standing before a wall covered in strange symbols. She turned to look at me, confusion in her eyes. "Tom, I found these symbols. They're the same ones we saw in the hospital in Pennsylvania," she said. I moved closer and realized the symbols depicted a strange ritual involving the mind and a dark entity. In the corner of the room, we discovered a small door leading to a basement. "We have to go down there," Kate said, determination flickering in her voice. The basement was dark and suffocating, far larger than I had expected. The air was thick and cold. We moved cautiously, our flashlight beams illuminating the old stone walls. After a few minutes, we reached a large chamber deep underground. In the center of the room was a circle drawn with charcoal, identical to the one we had seen earlier. Burnt-out candles were scattered around the floor. "I feel like we've stepped into an unfinished ritual," Kate whispered. Just then, the ground began to shake. Terrifying screams echoed from deep within the mine. From the shadows, ghostly figures of miners appeared, their eyes filled with despair. "Help us. Don't let him take us," they pleaded. But before we could react, a dark entity emerged from the center of the circle. "Tom, run," Kate screamed. We sprinted toward the exit, but the tunnel seemed endless. Darkness closed in around us, swallowing everything. I held Kate's hand tightly, refusing to let go as ghostly hands reached out from the stone walls, trying to pull her back. At last, we burst out of the mine and onto the surface. The cold air of the Appalachian forest had never felt sweeter. "Tom, look," Kate said, pointing toward the village. Before our eyes, the village began to fade, dissolving into the mist as if it had never existed. "Did that really happen?" I whispered, struggling to believe what I was seeing. Kate gripped my hand tightly. "I don't know, but maybe we shouldn't come back." We left the forest, but the feeling of being watched never left us. I didn't know if the village had truly existed or if it was just an illusion created by the curse. But one thing was certain, we had crossed the boundary between the real world and the world of darkness. And we were lucky to escape. The Cursed Lighthouse in Maine. We left the Appalachian forest just as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick canopy. The sense of relief was palpable as Kate and I inhaled the fresh air. finally free from the cursed village. But the haunting memories refused to fade. Seeking a change of pace, we drove north toward the coast of Maine, where we hoped the sound of crashing waves would bring some peace to our restless minds. "Tom, we really need to rest," Kate said as we pulled into a quaint seaside inn. "No more haunted villages or abandoned hospitals. Just the ocean and the waves." I nodded, fully agreeing with her, but, as always, fate seemed to have a different plan. One afternoon, while strolling around the harbor, we overheard a local fisherman recounting an eerie story. He spoke of an old lighthouse perched on the cliffs nearby, a place cursed by an ancient darkness. According to him, no one who entered the lighthouse at night ever returned. Sometimes the light turns on by itself, the fisherman whispered, glancing nervously toward the horizon. "And the foghorn? It sounds like someone crying from the depths of the sea." Kate shot me a look, one I knew all too well. It was the mix of curiosity and apprehension that had led us into countless dangerous adventures before. "We're not seriously considering," I began. But Kate had already nodded. "Of course we are. We have to see it for ourselves." The lighthouse stood atop a steep cliff, its silhouette looming ominously against the cloudy sky. The path leading up was narrow and treacherous, shrouded in a thick mist that clung to everything it touched. The waves below crashed violently against the jagged rocks, their relentless rhythm accompanied by the distant wail of the foghorn. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I asked as we reached the heavy wooden door at the base of the lighthouse. Its peeling paint revealed deep cracks in the weathered wood. Kate grinned mischievously. "When have we ever backed away from something like this?" The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a dark, cold interior. The scent of salt and mildew was overwhelming. My flashlight swept across the room, illuminating a spiral staircase winding its way up toward the top. "Watch your step," I said as we began our ascent. "These stairs look like they haven't been used in decades." Our footsteps echoed in the confined space as we climbed. The stone walls were damp and covered with patches of moss, seeming to whisper secrets long forgotten. At the top, we found ourselves in the lantern room, where the lighthouse's massive lens sat dormant under a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. "Tom, look at this," Kate said, pointing to an old journal lying on a nearby table. I picked it up, carefully opening the fragile leather cover. The pages inside were filled with hurried, almost frantic handwriting. March 12, 1887. The voices, they won't stop calling me. At night, when the ocean turns black, I hear them, the voices of those lost to the sea. They want me to go to the basement, where the real secret lies. I don't know how much longer I can resist. Looks like the lighthouse keeper encountered something far worse than isolation, I murmured, flipping through the pages. And whatever it was, it's still hiding in the basement. Kate tightened her grip on my arm. "We have to check it out." Swallowing hard, I nodded. "All right, but let's be careful." We made our way back down, searching for an entrance to the basement. Hidden behind an old curtain, we found a heavy iron door. I pushed it open, and a blast of cold air hit us, carrying the pungent scent of salt and decay. "Tom, something's waiting for us down here," Kate whispered. The basement was larger than I had expected, filled with rotting furniture and old crates. Strange symbols were carved into the stone walls, glowing faintly as the beam of my flashlight passed over them. In the center of the room lay a large circle made of salt. Partially melted candles surrounded the circle, and at its center stood a grotesque statue. "This looks like some kind of ritual," Kate murmured, her eyes fixed on the statue. I leaned in for a closer look, but at that moment, the ground beneath us began to tremble. Loud banging echoed from the walls, as if something, or someone, was trying to break free. "Run," I shouted, grabbing Kate's hand. We bolted up the stairs, our hearts racing. The door slammed shut behind us with a deafening thud, leaving us breathless and shaken. We stood on the staircase, gasping for breath, our hearts racing. The banging from the basement below continued relentlessly, like something, or someone, was trying to escape. The air grew heavier, and I could feel an unseen presence watching our every move. "Tom, I think we've awakened something that should have stayed buried," Kate whispered, her voice trembling. Suddenly, the lighthouse's beacon sprang to life, casting an eerie light across the ocean. Neither of us had touched the controls, yet the light rotated steadily, as if guided by an invisible hand. This isn't possible," I muttered, stepping toward the window. Down below, the waves rose unnaturally high, crashing violently against the rocks. The water seemed to be rising faster and faster, as if summoned by some ancient force. The banging on the walls turned into loud, rhythmic pounding, shaking the entire lighthouse. The front door flew open, and a blast of icy wind rushed in, carrying the sharp, salty scent of the sea. "Tom, look," Kate shouted, pointing at the staircase. Emerging from the darkness was a man in a long coat, his face pale and eyes sunken deep into his skull. He walked slowly toward us, his twisted smile sending chills down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a low, guttural rasp, like the echo of the ocean's depths. I instinctively pulled Kate closer. "We don't mean any harm. We'll leave right now." But he didn't stop. With each step, the lighthouse shook more violently, and the symbols on the walls glowed with an ominous blue light. "Tom, the control room," Kate shouted. "We might be able to shut off the light and break the curse." I grabbed her hand, and we sprinted toward the control room just below the lantern room. The machinery controlling the light was spinning wildly, emitting strange noises. "It's locked," I shouted, frantically flipping switches that refused to respond. Kate's eyes darted around the room until they settled on an old book lying in a drawer. She flipped through its pages and gasped, "Tom, it's a ritual to break the curse. If we light the beacon one final time in the right sequence, it could free us." I followed her instructions, adjusting the controls and preparing to light the beacon for what we hoped would be the last time. But just as we were about to activate it, the pale man appeared in the doorway. "You will never leave," he snarled, lunging toward us. The light burst to life, flooding the room with a blinding glow. The man screamed in agony, his form dissolving into the light until he vanished completely. The entire lighthouse shook violently one last time, then fell eerily silent. The beacon slowly dimmed until only darkness remained. "Tom, we did it," Kate whispered, clutching my arm. We stumbled out of the lighthouse, our bodies exhausted but our spirits lighter. Looking back, we saw the structure standing dark and lifeless, as if it had never been inhabited. On the drive back, Kate glanced into the rearview mirror and gasped, "Tom, look." I glanced back just in time to see a figure standing at the top of the lighthouse. His face was obscured by shadows, but his eyes shone with a haunting light. The beacon of the lighthouse flickered back to life, casting its eerie glow across the sea once more. We rowed away from the cursed lighthouse, the cold sea breeze cutting through our jackets. Kate sat behind me, her arms wrapped tightly around my waist, but the silence between us felt heavier than the crashing waves around us. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the lighthouse still standing, barely visible through the thick fog. Its faint light flickered one last time, like a distant, haunting farewell. "Do you think we're really free?" Kate whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. I didn't answer. Deep down, I knew the truth. Some things you can never truly escape. The lighthouse was just one chapter in a much bigger story. The tales we'd heard, the places we'd been, They were fragments of a puzzle leading to something far more ominous. The highway stretched endlessly before us, pulling us into another unknown destination. Kate's grip on my arm tightened, a silent reminder that we were still here, still together. But then, through the swirling fog, a shadowy outline of an old building appeared in the distance. A chill ran down my spine, a strange sense of familiarity. My heartbeat quickened. "Tom, do you see that?" Kate asked, her voice trembling slightly. I swallowed hard and slowed the bike. "We're almost there, to somewhere new. Are you ready?" She nodded, her eyes steady. "Always." And with that, we rode deeper into the mist, leaving the lighthouse and its mysteries behind. But I knew, wherever we were heading next, it wouldn't let us go so easily.